I choose Clara Whitmore." The words hit the Whitmore parlor like a pistol shot. Every head turned, every breath stopped. Amelia Whitmore, golden-haired, perfectly dressed, the daughter every mother in Willow Creek had spent years grooming, for exactly this moment, stood frozen as the richest cowboy in Montana looked past her. Looked past all of them, and fixed his eyes on the woman holding a serving tray by the kitchen door. If you're watching this story, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us now and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Nobody could have predicted what happened that afternoon in the Whitmore parlor. Nobody had prepared for it. Nobody had even considered it a possibility, because in Willow Creek, Montana, in the autumn of 1885, certain things were understood without being spoken. The way everyone understood that winter came hard off the mountains, and that a man, with Nathaniel Carter's wealth and standing, would make a predictable, sensible, universally approved choice. He would choose Amelia. Of course he would choose Amelia. The whole town had already decided it. The women who gathered at Sunday services had discussed it in careful, knowing whispers for 3 months. The men who traded cattle and weather predictions at the grain store had nodded, along with the certainty of people who believed they understood how the world worked. Even Clara herself, standing in the kitchen that morning, cracking eggs into a bowl, while her younger sister sat at the vanity mirror being dressed by their mother, had believed it. Why wouldn't she believe it? She had spent 28 years watching the world arrange itself around Amelia. She had grown up understanding, the way a person understands the difference between summer and winter, that some things simply were what they were. Amelia was chosen. Clara was useful. Those were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing, and for most of her life, Clara Whitmore had not lost a single night's sleep over that distinction. She had learned early that fighting against the shape of a thing only exhausted you without changing it. So she cooked, she mended, she kept the books, she rode out to check the fence lines when her father's back hurt too badly for him to mount a horse. She delivered meals to sick neighbors and sat with their children when the fever ran high. She did the 100 invisible things that kept a household and a ranch functioning, and she did them without complaint, without announcement, and largely without recognition. That was Clara Whitmore, not invisible exactly, but overlooked, which was its own particular kind of loneliness. The morning of Nathaniel Carter's visit, her mother had come into the kitchen while Clara was still at the stove. "Clara." Her mother's voice carried that particular tone, the one that meant a correction was coming. "I need you dressed properly before he arrives." "I'll change before they sit down," Clara said. She didn't look up from the eggs. "You need to be presentable. Not just acceptable." Clara set the spatula down. She turned and looked at her mother with the flat, patient expression she had perfected over 28 years of conversations, exactly like this one. "Mama," she said, "he's coming to see Amelia." Her mother didn't deny it. She straightened the edge of her apron and glanced toward the hallway, where the sounds of Amelia's preparations were already filling the house, the rustle of good fabric, the bright, excited murmur of a young woman who had spent her entire life being told she was extraordinary and had chosen to believe it completely. Still, her mother said, "Make an effort." Clara made an effort. She changed into a clean dress, not her best, which she saved for church and burials, and pinned her dark hair away from her face with the same efficiency she applied to everything else. Then she returned to the kitchen, because the food still needed to be made, and nobody else was going to make it. Nathaniel Carter arrived at 2:30. Clara heard the sound of hooves and wheels from the kitchen window. She heard her father's voice rise to its formal register, the one he used for important men and visiting, and she heard the lower unhurried reply that could only belong to someone who had never needed to fill silence with noise. She did not go to the window. She lifted the tray she had prepared and waited for the moment she would carry it through. She had done this before, not for Nathaniel specifically, but for men like him. Willow Creek was not so large that a wealthy rancher could move through it without every family of standing, trying to position their daughters favorably. Clara had learned to move through those rooms like a piece of furniture. Present, functional, unobtrusive, she was not bitter about it. She simply understood it. What she did not understand, what she was not prepared for, was what happened when she stepped through the kitchen door and into the parlor. Nathaniel Carter was standing near the fireplace, one hand resting at his side, listening to her father make some point about the condition of the valley's cattle market. He was taller than Clara had expected, from a distance broad across the shoulders, with the particular kind of stillness that comes from a man who has spent years doing physical labor but has learned that stillness, not noise, is what commands a room. He was not handsome in the way that poems were written about. His face had been worked over by weather and time. But there was something in his expression, a quality of attention, of looking at the world, and actually seeing it, that Clara noticed before she noticed anything else. She crossed toward the small table near the window to set the tray down. And that was when it happened. He stopped listening to her father. Not rudely, not with any dramatic gesture or announcement. He simply stopped, the way a man stops when something catches his attention that he had not expected to find there. His gaze moved across the room and settled on Clara with a directness that she felt like a physical thing. She did not look up. She was not the kind of woman who looked up at a man when she could sense he was watching her. She set the tray down carefully, straightened the edge of the cloth, and prepared to return to the kitchen. Miss Whitmore, his voice was quiet, but it carried. And every person in that room heard it. Clara looked up. Because he was speaking to her, she was certain of that, even before she processed the words. Not to Amelia, who had positioned herself near the settee in her best blue dress. Not to her mother, not to the room in general, to her. "The coffee is ready," Clara said, because she did not know what else to say. "I can pour if you'd like." "Thank you," he said, "I would." He walked toward her, not toward Amelia, not toward the settee, where the proper social architecture of the afternoon had been carefully constructed for him to sit and admire her younger sister. Toward Clara. She poured the coffee with steady hands because her hands were always steady. She handed him the cup. Their fingers did not touch. She was careful about that. But he was close enough that she could see the particular quality of his attention again, and it unsettled her in a way she could not immediately name. "Mr. Carter," her father said from across the room. The word carried a faint urgency, the sound of a man trying to redirect a conversation without appearing to redirect it. "Amelia was just telling me about the benefit dance next month. Perhaps you'd like to hear, Mr. Whitmore." Nathaniel's voice was still quiet, still unhurried. "I appreciate everything your family has offered today." He turned slightly, not away from Clara, but toward the center of the room, where everyone could see him clearly. "But I'd like to be direct, if you'll permit me." The room changed. Clara could feel it change, the particular quality of attention that descends on a space when everyone present suddenly understands that something unexpected is occurring. Her father's smile became uncertain around the edges. Amelia's hands, folded carefully in her lap, went very still. "I came here with a specific purpose," Nathaniel said. "I've been taking my time about it because I wanted to be certain I was making the right decision. And I am certain." He paused. "I would like to formally request permission to court Clara." The silence was total. Clara heard her own pulse. She was sure, in that strange suspended moment, that everyone in the room could hear it. "Clara," her father repeated. The name came out of him like a question he hadn't meant to ask aloud. "Yes, sir." Nathaniel set his coffee cup down on the tray, with the unhurried precision of a man who had made up his mind long before this moment, and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Clara, if she's willing." Then he looked at her, not at her father. "Not at the room, at her, Miss Whitmore," he said. "I realize this is entirely unexpected. I don't want to put you in a difficult position, and I won't pretend this is a simple thing I'm asking. You don't owe me an answer right now, but I wanted you to know in front of your family that it is you I came here to ask." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the 28 years of being the useful one, the capable one, the one who made everything work so that other people could shine. She thought about the 100 times she had carried a tray through a room and watched men's eyes move past her, like she was part of the furniture. She thought about the fact that she did not know this man. Not really. And that she did not know what he wanted or why he had looked at her the way he had. She thought about all the reasons a sensible woman should say nothing and excuse herself from a situation she did not understand. And then she thought, but what if I asked? Why, she said. The word came out plain and direct, the way Clara did everything. She watched something shift, in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a kind of recognition, like a man who had been waiting for a specific question. Because I've been watching this valley for 3 years, he said. And in 3 years, I've seen what builds things that last and what doesn't. I've seen what kind of person carries real weight when it matters. He held her gaze. I've seen you, Miss Whitmore. You've seen me carrying trays, Clara said. I've seen you ride 6 miles in a November rainstorm to bring medicine to the Alderman family when their youngest was sick, he said. I've seen you talk down 3 different men from making decisions that would have ruined them quietly, without taking credit for it. I've seen you repair a fence line in January when your father couldn't get out of bed and then return home and cook supper as if nothing had happened. He paused. I've seen considerably more than a tray. The silence that followed was different from the first one, charged with something Clara could not name. It was her mother who broke it. Well, the word landed in the room with the particular weight of a woman trying to reassemble her expectations into a new shape before anyone noticed how completely they had shattered. This is certainly unexpected, Mama. Amelia's voice was very quiet. Clara looked at her sister. Amelia's face was, and this, Clara would think about later, was the part that surprised her most, not angry. It was something more complicated, something that might have been relief or might have been a grief. Clara did not know how to read yet. But that was later. In that moment, Clara turned back to Nathaniel Carter and said, I would like some time to think. Of course, he said, and I have questions. I expected you would. I don't make decisions that affect my life based on one conversation, she said. Especially not with a man I've spoken to for less than 10 minutes. Something moved across his face that might have been, she thought, the beginning of a real smile. Miss Whitmore, he said, that is exactly the kind of woman I was hoping you'd be. The afternoon unraveled from there in a series of small contained explosions. Her father retreated to his study with Nathaniel to discuss things that men discussed when they believed a matter had effectively been decided. Her mother stood in the hallway outside the parlor for a full 5 minutes without saying or speaking, which was something Clara had never seen her mother do in 28 years of watching her. And Amelia sat beside Clara on the edge of the kitchen steps, while the light shifted toward evening, and said nothing at first. Just sat there with her hands in her lap, and her perfect hair slightly disordered, and her expression doing something complicated that Clara could not decode. Finally, Amelia said, Did you know that he was coming? Clara shook her head. I knew what everyone knew, which is what everyone was wrong about. He never even looked at me, Amelia said. And there was something in her voice, not quite hurt, not quite anger, that made Clara look at her more carefully. Does that bother you? Amelia was quiet for a moment. I think, she said slowly, that what bothers me is that I'm not sure it bothers me the way it's supposed to. She looked at her hands. I've spent my whole life being the one they look at. And for just a moment, when he looked past me, I felt something like relief. She paused. What does that mean? Clara did not answer. She was not certain she knew. But she filed the question away in the part of her mind where she kept things that mattered and would need to be returned to later. What she did know, what was already beginning to settle into place with the quiet certainty that preceded all of Clara's significant understandings, was that the afternoon had shifted something she could not shift back. Nathaniel Carter had spoken her name in front of her entire family and a room that had spent years failing to see her, and now the whole of Willow Creek would know about it before sundown. She was not the kind of woman who deceived herself. She knew what people would say. She could already hear the particular quality of the whispers, not exactly, but certain, the whispers of people who believed they understood something they did not. They would say he had made a mistake. They would say she must have done something. They would say Amelia was the obvious choice, and therefore the only reasonable one, and that any deviation from that obvious choice required an explanation that reflected badly on someone. Clara had lived in Willow Creek her entire life. She knew exactly how it worked. She had simply, until today, not been in a position where it mattered in a personal way. Now it did. She sat on the kitchen steps while her sister breathed quietly beside her, and she made the first of a series of decisions that would change everything. She would meet with Nathaniel Carter again. She would ask her questions. She would get honest answers, or she would walk away because Clara Whitmore had spent 28 years being useful to people who did not consider whether she was happy, and she was not. She had decided somewhere in the last hour, prepared to spend another 28 the same way. If this man truly saw her the way he said he did, she would know. Because she was very good at knowing the difference between a thing that was real and a thing that was performed. It was one of the skills she had developed in all those years of being the one who paid attention to what nobody else noticed. And if he was performing, if there was something else underneath, the quiet certainty and the direct gaze and the particular way he had said her name, like it was the only name in the room, she would find that out too. Clara Whitmore had never been reckless, but she had also, she realized with a clarity that surprised her, never been given a reason to be anything else. She was being given one now. The week that followed was the strangest of Clara's life, and she had lived through winters that killed cattle, and springs that washed away fences, and the slow, grinding grief of watching her mother pour all of her hopes into a younger daughter, with the particular devotion of a woman who had chosen her favorite, and could not admit it even to herself. She met Nathaniel Carter 4 times. The first meeting was at the Alderman Ranch, which surprised her. She had gone to return a basket she had borrowed from Mrs. Alderman in September, and he was there sitting across from Henry Alderman at the kitchen table going over the sort of paperwork that meant he was helping the older man with something he was too proud to ask anyone local for assistance with. When he saw Clara, he stood. He did not make it awkward. He simply acknowledged her the way a person acknowledges someone whose presence they are pleased to encounter, and then he went back to helping Henry Alderman with his figures. She stayed for an hour. She helped Mrs. Alderman with a preserving problem that had been resisting solution all morning. And she and Nathaniel did not speak directly more than twice, but she watched how he was with Henry. She watched the patience and the absence of condescension, and the particular way he listened without making a person feel like they were being humored. She decided she had learned something important. The second meeting was deliberate, arranged through her father, with a formality that made Clara slightly tired because she was not 16 and did not require a chaperone to speak to a man in her own parlor. She told her mother exactly that. Her mother gave her the look that meant she was being handled. Clara sat in the parlor with Nathaniel Carter and asked him every question she had been constructing for 5 days. She asked him why he had not married before. He told her the truth that he had spent 12 years building something he considered worth a fortune, and that he had not wanted to bring a woman into struggle and difficulty when he could have held out for stability. She could see it was the truth because it did not come out of him with the shape of something rehearsed. She asked him what he expected from a wife. He did not list things like obedience or decoration or the production of children in a particular quantity. He said he expected a partner. He said it simply, as if it were not a remarkable thing to say, which somehow made it more remarkable. She asked him what he would do if she disagreed with him. He looked at her steadily. "I would want to know why," he said. "And if your reason was better than mine, I'd expect to be wrong." She asked, "What if it happened often, that you disagreed with me? That you were wrong and I was right? Then I'd be a lucky man," he said. Because I'd rather have a partner who was right than a wife who agreed with everything I said and left me walking into walls." Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I'll give you an answer by the end of the month." The third meeting was accidental. She was riding back from the eastern fence line. Her father's back had been bad again, and she was the only one who had gone out to check. And she came across Nathaniel on the road, helping a family she did not recognize get their wagon wheel back on the axle. He did not know she was watching. She stayed at the tree line and observed. He was patient. He was strong. He made a joke that made the exhausted-looking father laugh for the first time in what was probably hours. He declined payment. He waited until the wagon was moving again before he turned back to his own horse. Clara had made her decision before she reached home. She gave her answer on the 24th day. She rode to his ranch alone, which scandalized exactly the people she had anticipated it would scandalize, and she told him yes. She told him her conditions. She told him what she expected, and what she would not accept, and what she brought to any agreement between two people. He listened to every word. When she was finished, he said, "Are those all of them?" "For now," she said. "Then yes," he said, "to all of them." She rode home in the late afternoon light with something in her chest she had not expected, something that was not quite joy, and not quite relief, and not entirely different from the feeling of walking into a room and discovering that the foundation underfoot was considerably more solid than you had been prepared to find. It was not love yet. She was honest enough with herself to know that. But it was the beginning of something real, which, for a woman who had spent 28 years being told the real things were not for her, was more than enough to begin with. The announcement reached Willow Creek, in the way all significant announcements reached small towns, not through any single dramatic revelation, but through the osmotic movement of knowledge, through a community that paid close attention to everything. By the time Clara's father confirmed it at Sunday services, everyone already knew. And by the time they knew, they had already had 4 days to construct their opinions. The opinions were not kind. He'll regret it within a year. She must have said something, done something. Men like Nathaniel Carter don't choose women like Clara Whitmore without a reason. Poor Amelia. The humiliation of it. Clara heard these things. Not because anyone said them to her face, because they did not, or not directly, but because she had spent a lifetime being present in rooms without being noticed, and invisible women hear remarkable quantities of the truth. She did not argue with any of it. She did not correct it. She did not perform offense for an audience that would have enjoyed watching her perform offense. She went home. She sat with it quietly, in the way she sat with all difficult things. And then she continued, preparing for the most significant change of her life, with the same practical, sieved competence she brought to every undertaking. What she had not prepared for, what she could not have anticipated, even with 28 years of practice, at reading the currents beneath the surfaces of things, was the conversation with her father. William Whitmore came to her room the evening after Sunday services. He knocked, which he rarely did. He came in and stood near the window with his hands at his sides, and his expression carrying the particular weight of a man who has spent 3 days trying to decide how to say something and still has not entirely figured it out. "Clara," he said. "Papa, I want you to understand something." He stopped. Started again. "I want you to know that your mother and I, we have always wanted good things for you." Clara looked at him. She said nothing. "I know that we have not always." Another stop. He turned toward the window. "I know that Amelia has always been, that people noticed Amelia. And I know that sometimes in noticing Amelia, we did not always, that you did not always feel." "Papa," Clara said quietly. He stopped. "I know," she said. "I know what you're trying to say. You don't have to find every word." He turned back to look at her. His face was carrying something she had not seen there in a very long time, something old and faintly ashamed. "You deserved more attention than we gave you," he said. "And I should have made sure you knew your worth." Clara was quiet for a moment. The acknowledgement was more than she had expected, more than she had believed was coming. "I figured it out," she said finally. "With help," her father said. From a man who somehow saw clearly what I failed to see at all. He cleared his throat. That says something about me, Clara. It says something I am not proud of. It says something about Nathaniel, too, she said. Give him the credit. Her father nodded. He stood there a moment longer, looking as if he wanted to say more and had arrived at the limits of what he knew how to say. Then he moved toward the door. Papa, Clara said. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for saying it. He nodded once more and left. Clara sat in the quiet of her room, with the acknowledgement settling into her like something she had not known she was carrying until it was finally, unexpectedly, set down. She had spent 28 years not knowing she was waiting for that. Now she knew, and now she had to figure out what she wanted to carry into whatever came next. She had the entire night to think about it. She used every minute. Clara Whitmore had never been the kind of woman who needed the approval of a town to feel certain about her own decisions. But she had also never been the kind of woman who pretended that disapproval did not exist, or that it could not cost her something real. She understood the difference between not caring what people thought and being naive about what people thinking could do to a life. And in the week after her answer to Nathaniel Carter became public knowledge throughout Willow Creek, she learned exactly how much that distinction mattered. It started with small things, the kind of small things that a woman with less experience of being invisible might have missed entirely. Mrs. Calloway, who had always been pleasant enough in the way that women are pleasant to people they do not consider worth the effort of genuine warmth, suddenly found pressing business elsewhere whenever Clara arrived, at the dry goods store. The Henderson daughters, both of whom had been circling Nathaniel Carter with the patient calculation of women who had been taught to treat wealthy bachelors as a category of problem to be solved, began speaking loudly in public spaces about the mysterious circumstances of the engagement, their voices carrying just far enough to be heard without being direct enough to be confronted. And then there was Margaret Fowler. Margaret Fowler was the kind of woman who had decided sometime in her early 30s that the most efficient use of her considerable intelligence was managing other people's social standing. She had a gift for it. She knew which word in which ear would travel fastest, and she deployed that gift with the precision of a woman who genuinely believed she was performing a service. She found Clara at the post office on a Tuesday morning and positioned herself with the particular casualness that meant the approach had been planned. Clara, she said the name warmly. I heard the news. Nathaniel Carter, of all people. She paused just long enough. We're all a little surprised, of course. I'm sure you understand. I understand that people were expecting something else, Clara said. She sorted through the letters she had collected, without looking up. It's just Amelia, everyone assumed. Margaret let the sentence trail off in a way that invited Clara to finish it. Clara did not finish it. And you know how people talk in a small town. I'd hate for you to be hurt by misunderstandings. Clara looked at her then. Directly, with the full weight of her attention, which she had learned was more effective than almost any other response available to her. Margaret, she said, are you worried about me? Or are you telling me something people are saying? Margaret blinked, just once, but Clara caught it. I'm trying to be a friend, Margaret said. Then be one, Clara said pleasantly, and tell me directly what you came here to tell me. The silence between them lasted about 4 seconds. Then Margaret rearranged her expression into something that looked like concern, but was built out of different materials entirely. People are saying, she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence, that you must have done something to make him overlook Amelia. That a man with Nathaniel Carter's options wouldn't choose well. She stopped again. You know what I mean. I do, Clara said. And you can tell the people who are saying that if you happen to see any of them, that Nathaniel Carter chose me because he wanted to. And that I accepted him because I decided he was worth accepting. She picked up her letters and tucked them under her arm. And that in neither case was it anyone else's business. She walked out of the post office with her spines straight and her breathing steady. And she did not let the tremor in her hands become visible until she was around the corner and out of sight. She was not ashamed. She wanted to be clear with herself about that. The tremor was not shame, it was the physical cost of holding herself completely still, under a quality of scrutiny she had not been subjected to before. For 28 years she had been overlooked, and being overlooked, she now understood with new precision, had been a kind of armor. Nathaniel Carter had removed that armor when he said her name in front of everyone. And now the same people who had looked through her for decades were looking directly at her, and finding reasons to doubt what they saw. She rode home that afternoon with her jaw set, and her thoughts moving in the particular, rapid, practical way they moved when she was working through a problem. She needed to talk to Nathaniel. She found him at her father's ranch. He had come to discuss arrangements with her father, which was its own category of complicated, and she waited until her father had gone back inside before she said what she needed to say. "People are going to make this as difficult as possible," she said, without preamble, because she had never seen the point of preamble. Nathaniel was leaning against the corral fence. He did not appear surprised by her directness, which was one of the things she was beginning to appreciate about him. "I know," he said, "and I need to know before this goes any further whether you're prepared for that. Not in a theoretical way, in the way that means next week and the week after, and every Sunday service for the next year, people will make it known, in one way or another, that they believe you made a mistake." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man who was uncertain, but the quiet of a man who was choosing his words with genuine care. "Clara," he said, "do you think you're the only one who's been assessed by this town?" She looked at him. "I'm a man who came here from outside with nothing they knew about me, and built something larger than most of what was already here," he said. "I've had 12 years of people finding reasons to doubt what they see. I'm not afraid of it. It will be different when it's about me," she said. "About us maybe," he said, "but different doesn't mean harder." He met her eyes. "And I've never made a decision because it was going to be easy." Clara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "I needed to hear that." "I know," he said again, and this time there was something in his voice that was warm without being sentimental, the tone of a man who understood what she was actually asking beneath the words she was using, and was answering the real question. She rode home that evening feeling more settled than she had since the afternoon in the parlor. Not because everything was simple, nothing was simple, but because she had established, clearly and without illusion on either side, what the ground beneath them actually looked like. And it was solid. What she had not established, what she had not yet seen, and would not see for another 4 days, was what Amelia was doing with her own feelings about the situation. The two sisters had lived in the same house for 28 years. They had not been enemies, but they had not been close in the way that sisters in stories were close, because closeness requires a particular quality of equality, and equality had never been the governing principle of the Whitmore household. Clara had always understood, without anyone needing to say it directly, that Amelia occupied a different position in the family's emotional economy. She had not resented it, or not in the clean, simple way that resentment usually worked. It was more complicated than that, the way things are always more complicated when they are about love and expectation, and the ways a family shapes itself around what it believes it needs. But the night she found Amelia sitting in the kitchen in the dark, Clara understood that something had broken loose in her sister that had been held in position for a very long time. "Amelia, I couldn't sleep." Clara sat down across from her. The kitchen was quiet, with the particular quality of quiet that belongs to the middle of the night, in a house where everyone else is sleeping. She did not reach for the lamp. She let the dark stay. "Say it," Clara said. Amelia looked at her. "Say what?" "Whatever it is you've been carrying around for a week. Say it. We've been walking around each other like we're both made of something fragile, and we are not fragile women. So say it." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice that was smaller than Clara had ever heard from her, "I don't know how to feel about any of this." "Start with how you actually feel," Clara said, "not how you think you're supposed to." "I feel." Amelia stopped, tried again. I feel like everything I was told I was for my whole life turned out to be not enough. Or wrong. Or not the thing that actually mattered. She pressed her hands flat against the table. I was the beautiful one. That's what I was. That was my whole. Everyone treated it like a ball. Be beautiful. Be charming. Be the one they look at. And I did that. I did it my whole life. And then a man walks into our parlor and looks right past all of it like it's... She stopped again. Like it's nothing. It's not nothing, Clara said. No, but it's not everything. Amelia looked at her. Do you understand what that's like? To be told your whole life that you are a specific thing, and then find out that the thing you are is not the thing that someone wants. Clara was quiet for a moment. Amelia, she said, do you understand what it's like to be told your whole life that you are useful, and to wonder every single day whether that's the only thing you are? The silence between them held something new, something that had not been there before. Clara watched her sister's face move through a series of things she could not entirely name, but which she recognized as the expression of someone reorganizing their understanding of a situation they thought they already knew. No, Amelia said quietly, I don't think I did understand that. We've been living in the same house, Clara said. But I don't think we've been seeing the same house. Amelia breathed in, let it out slowly. Are you angry with me? For all of it. The years of it. Clara considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because Amelia was asking something real and she was not going to reward real questions with easy answers. I was, she said finally, not at you specifically, but at the shape of things, at the way the house arranged itself. She paused. I'm less angry now than I was. Because of him? Because of me, Clara said. He didn't fix anything. He just made it possible for me to see what was already true. She held her sister's gaze. I had worth before he said so. I just hadn't found a way to believe it fully yet. Amelia reached across the table and put her hand over Clara's. It was the most direct gesture of affection she had offered, in years perhaps ever, in the way that counts. I'm glad he chose you, Amelia said, and her voice was steady enough that Clara believed her. They sat together in the dark kitchen for another hour, talking in the way they should have been talking for 20 years, and Clara allowed herself to feel something she had not expected, the tentative, cautious beginning of genuine sisterhood. Not the performed version, the real one. By the time the engagement became official, in the eyes of Willow Creek's social infrastructure, meaning that the minister had been informed, and the date had been discussed, and the various practical arrangements that a marriage between two established households required, had begun to take shape, the pressure from outside the family had intensified in ways Clara had anticipated, and in at least one way she had not. The way she had not anticipated came in the form of a man named Preston Dale. Preston Dale was the kind of man who existed in every town, the one who had decided, at some point, that the presence of someone more successful than himself was a personal grievance. He had been in Willow Creek for 7 years, running a cattle operation about a third the size of Nathaniel's, and he had spent most of those 7 years finding sophisticated reasons to resent everything Nathaniel Carter had built. He was not unintelligent. He was not obviously vindictive. He was the particular, dangerous kind of man who dressed his resentment in the language of principle. He came to see Clara's father on a Wednesday afternoon. Clara was not invited to the meeting, but she was in the room adjacent, and William Whitmore's study had walls that were thinner than anyone who had ever held a significant conversation inside them seemed to understand. William, Preston Dale said, I'm going to speak plainly because I think you deserve plain speaking. I appreciate that, her father said. His voice carried a careful neutrality. Nathaniel Carter is not who this town believes him to be. A pause. I have reason to think the land he built that ranch on was not acquired as cleanly as he'd like people to believe. Clara went very still. That's a serious thing to say, her father said. I know it is, which is why I'm saying it to you privately, before it becomes something said publicly. Another pause. I would hate for your daughter to be attached to a man whose reputation, or worse, whose legal standing, turns out to be something other than what she was led to believe. Clara heard her father shift in his chair. She could read the quality of his silence. He was thinking, not reacting. Which meant he was taking it seriously. Which meant this was not simply going to go away. "Do you have documentation?" her father asked. "I have information," Preston said. "Documentation takes time, but I'm working on it." She heard her father say that he would need to think carefully about what Preston had told him. She heard Preston say he understood completely. She heard the sounds of a meeting concluding with the particular careful courtesy of men who are being polite because they do not yet know whether they are allies or opponents. And then she heard the front door close. And she sat in the adjacent room with her hands folded in her lap and her mind working at a speed that would have surprised anyone who had ever made the mistake of categorizing her as merely practical. Preston Dale had not come to warn her father out of concern. She was certain of that with the same bone-deep certainty she brought to all her best assessments. He had come to plant something, to introduce uncertainty at the exact moment when removing it would be most damaging. To create in her father's mind a question that would grow in the dark and emerge later as doubt. The question was why. She had her answer within 3 days, because Clara had learned long ago that the most efficient way to understand why a person did something was to ask who benefited. And the person who benefited from Nathaniel Carter's reputation being damaged in Willow Creek at this particular moment, with this particular engagement newly announced, was any man who had wanted to buy the Carter ranch lands and found Nathaniel an unmovable obstacle. She needed information she did not currently have. She needed to know what Preston Dale actually believed he had, and what the truth of Nathaniel's land acquisition looked like. And she needed to know it before her father's doubt had time to calcify into something harder to shift. She went to Nathaniel directly, which was the only way she knew how to go to anyone about anything important. She did not soften the approach. She sat across from him in the front room of his ranch house, and she said, "Preston Dale came to see my father. He told him your land might have been acquired legally. I need to know everything about how you built this ranch, and I need to know it now, because I am not walking into something I don't understand." Nathaniel went very still. Not the stillness of guilt. She would have recognized guilt because she had watched enough people carry it to know its weight and its shape. This was the stillness of a man who had just heard something that explained several things he had been partially confused about. "Say that again," he said. She said it again, exactly, with every detail she had heard through the wall. Nathaniel sat forward, his hands laced together between his knees. "Preston Dale has been trying to buy the eastern section of my range for 4 years, he said. I've told him no each time. The last time was 8 months ago. Then he's using this engagement as leverage," Clara said. "Because my father, doubting you, is more useful to him than anything else he can do." "He won't find anything in my land records," Nathaniel said. "Everything is clean. Every transaction is documented. I have been meticulous, because I knew from the beginning that I was an outsider building something in a place that would be watched carefully." "Then we need those records visible," Clara said. "Not to Preston Dale. To my father, before whatever story Preston is building gets a chance to take root." Nathaniel looked at her with an expression. She was beginning to recognize the one that looked like admiration, but was made of something quieter. Something more considered. "You already know what needs to happen," he said. "I usually do," she said. "I'm asking you to trust me to help do it." He nodded, once, completely. "Then let's get the records," she said. What followed was 3 days of work that Clara had not expected to find satisfying, and could not help finding deeply, genuinely satisfying. She went through every document in Nathaniel's land files with the focused attention she had always given to the ranch accounts, the kind of attention that did not get tired, and did not get impatient, and did not skip anything because it looked boring, because she had learned long ago that the important things were almost always in the places that looked boring. The records were, as he had said, completely clean. Better than clean, they were meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and documented in a way that suggested a man who had expected, from the beginning, that someone would eventually try to find a problem in them, and had made finding a problem impossible. She noted every transaction, traced every boundary description, cross-referenced every deed against the county records Gatroid she borrowed from the land office through a contact she had spent 3 years being useful to. And then she organized everything into a presentation that her father could not misread. She brought it to William Whitmore on a Thursday evening. She sat across from him and walked him through every document without flourish and without drama, because drama was for people who needed to compensate for a weak argument, and her argument was not weak. Her father was quiet for a long time after she finished. "Clara," he said, "everything is there," she said. "Every acre, every date, every transaction. There is nothing Preston Dale can find, because there is nothing to find." Her father looked at the documents arranged on the table between them. Then he looked at her. "You did this," he said. It was not quite a question. "Nathaniel provided the records," she said. "I organized them. In 3 days, it didn't require more time than that." He was quiet again. She could see him reassembling something in his understanding, not just of the situation with Preston Dale, but of something larger. Something about who his daughter was and what she was capable of, and how long he had been failing to see it. "Preston Dale came to plant doubt," she said. "That's all he did." "Don't let him have it." "No," her father said slowly. "I don't believe I will." He looked at her across the table. "Clara, when did you become?" He stopped. "I was always this," she said. Not with anger, with the simple, patient clarity of someone stating a fact that should have been noticed earlier. "You just weren't looking." The acknowledgement landed between them and stayed there, weightier than anything Preston Dale could have planted, and considerably more useful. But the matter with Preston Dale was not finished. It was, in fact, only beginning. Because a man like Preston Dale, the kind who dressed resentment in principle and performed concern as strategy, did not abandon a plan simply because the first attempt had not worked. He recalibrated. He found a new angle, and the new angle, when it arrived, was not directed at Nathaniel's land records. It was directed somewhere considerably more personal. It arrived in the form of a letter. The letter was addressed to Clara. It came to the Whitmore house in a plain envelope with no return address. And Clara knew from the handwriting, which was deliberate in the way that disguised handwriting is always deliberate, that Preston Dale had either written it himself or had someone write it for him. She opened it without ceremony and read it in the time it took to read 4 paragraphs. The letter said, in language that was careful enough to be unactionable and specific enough to be calculated, that Nathaniel Carter had a prior attachment. A woman in Colorado, a situation that had ended badly, and for reasons that did not reflect well on his character. Clara read it twice, set it down. Then she went to Nathaniel and put the letter on the table in front of him. He read it. His expression did not change in the way that guilt changes an expression. It changed in the way that weariness changes one, the particular, familiar weariness of a man who has encountered this specific tactic before. "There was a woman in Colorado," he said, 8 years ago. "Tell me," Clara said. He told her. All of it clearly, without evasion, with the same meticulous honesty he had brought to every difficult question she had asked him. The woman's name was Helen. He had believed they were building toward a marriage. She had decided, ultimately, that the uncertainty of his situation, at the time he had been in the middle of building the ranch and had very little to offer, except work and intention, was not what she wanted. She had married someone else. It had ended without cruelty on either side, only disappointment. "Preston is suggesting something darker than that," Clara said. "Preston is suggesting what will cause the most damage," Nathaniel said. "The truth is ordinary. Ordinary doesn't hurt the way he needs it to hurt." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Is there anything in what happened with Helen that would give him enough to work with?" she asked. "Anything at all that looks different from the outside than it was from the inside?" Nathaniel met her eyes. "No," he said, "but that won't stop him from trying to make it look like there is." "Then we need to be ahead of it," Clara said. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "I want to write to Helen." Nathaniel looked at her. Not to cause any difficulty, Clara said, because she is a real person and she deserves to be asked directly rather than spoken about. And because if Preston Dale tries to use her story as a weapon, I want to have spoken to her first. She held his gaze. If you're the man I think you are, she'll tell me the same thing you just told me. Nathaniel was very still for a long moment. Then he said, I'll give you her address. Clara wrote the letter that night. She wrote it plainly and without strategy, because dishonest letters produced dishonest responses, and she wanted the truth, not a performance of it. She told Helen exactly who she was, and what she needed to understand and why. She said she was not asking out of jealousy or suspicion, but out of the practical understanding that a man's history was part of what she was agreeing to when she agreed to him. The response came back in 11 days. Helen wrote in a hand that was precise and warm at the same time, the hand of a woman who had figured out her own mind and was comfortable with what she found there. She confirmed everything Nathaniel had said. She added, he was a good man who deserved better than what I gave him. I hope you understand his worth better than I did. I believe you already do, or you wouldn't have written this letter. Clara read it once, folded it, kept it. She did not share it with anyone except Nathaniel, who read it with an expression that was complicated in ways she did not press him to explain. What she did instead was go directly to Margaret Fowler, because Margaret Fowler was the fastest channel through which information moved in Willow Creek, and tell her, plainly and without apparent strategy, that she had corresponded with a woman from Nathaniel's past in Colorado, and found everything entirely consistent with what she knew of his character. Within 48 hours, this information had moved through Willow Creek in exactly the way Clara had understood it would. And Preston Dale's manufactured shadow had been replaced by a different story, the story of a woman who had looked into her intended's history with clear eyes and found nothing to doubt. It was not the last move Preston Dale would make. She knew that. But it was the first time Clara Whitmore had played the game on her own terms, in her own name, and watched the town recalibrate its understanding of who she was. She walked out of Margaret Fowler's house that afternoon, into the sharp October air, and she breathed it in with the feeling of someone who had just discovered they were considerably more capable of fighting than they had known, and who found that knowledge unexpected and warming, and entirely their own, more valuable than almost anything they had been given. The wedding date was set for the second Saturday of November. 6 weeks away, close enough to feel real, far enough that Clara understood there was still considerable ground between where she stood and where she was going. She had spent her entire life managing that kind of distance, the space between what was and what needed to happen, with the patient, forward-moving practicality that had always been her strongest characteristic. But she was learning, in the weeks since her engagement had become the organizing fact of Willow Creek's social conversation, that this particular distance was different from any she had navigated before. Because this time, the ground itself was shifting while she walked on it. Preston Dale had gone quiet after the letter from Helen reached Willow Creek's conversational channels. Not the quiet of a man who had given up Clara, had never believed he was the type, but the quiet of a man who was deciding which direction to come from next. She had learned enough about how he operated to know that the silence meant something was being built rather than abandoned. And she watched the edges of her daily life with the particular attention she gave to things that had not yet declared themselves. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations moved forward with the momentum of a thing that had been set in motion and could not easily be reversed. And Clara discovered that managing the practical architecture of her own marriage was genuinely, unexpectedly complex. Not because the work was difficult. She had been managing complex domestic and financial arrangements since she was 17 years old, but because this was for herself. And managing things for herself felt different in a way she had not fully anticipated. She had spent so many years directing her competence outward that turning it inward required a kind of reorientation she had to think about deliberately. Nathaniel came to the Whitmore ranch every few days, always with a reason that was practical and usually real. Something to discuss with her father. A question about the arrangements. A matter of the property agreement that needed both their signatures. But he stayed longer than the practical reason required, and Clara noticed that he managed to create pockets of conversation with her that existed outside the formal architecture of engagement visits, in the spaces between one thing and another, where people said what they actually meant. One afternoon, he found her in the barn, working through an account ledger she had taken out there because the light was better and she needed quiet. He sat on a hay bale across from her without asking if the interruption was welcome, which she had noticed he did, assumed his presence was acceptable, and let her tell him otherwise if it wasn't. She had found to her own mild surprise that she never told him otherwise. "You're doing my books," he said. "I'm doing our books," she said without looking up. "Your ranch manager has been recording the hay purchases under operating expenses instead of capital investment. It's been overstating your quarterly costs for at least 2 years." A beat of silence. "How did you find that?" he asked. "I looked." She made a notation. "You were also being overcharged by the grain supplier in Billings. The invoices don't match the delivery records by about 11%. Another silence. "This one longer, Clara," he said. She looked up. "I have been trying to find that discrepancy for 8 months, he said. She looked back down at the ledger. It was in the third column of the July records. The notation style changed. Whoever was making the entries switched from recording weight to recording volume without flagging the unit change. Once you know to look for the inconsistency, it moves in a straight line back to the beginning." She heard him breathe, and then she heard something that was new, a quiet, genuine sound of someone who was not performing gratitude, but actually feeling it. Which was a sound most people could not produce convincingly because they had too much pride about needing to feel it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "The billing supplier is going to push back." "Will he?" "Men like that always do." She closed the ledger. "But he's been doing it for 2 years and he knows it. He'll settle rather than have it examined formally." She looked at Nathaniel steadily. He was looking at her with the expression she had catalogued by now, the one she had described to herself as admiration, but was beginning to think was something more specific than that. The expression of a man who was being surprised, repeatedly, by the same person, and who found the experience of being surprised not threatening, but something closer to wonder. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it honestly." "I always answer you honestly," he said. "I know, that's why I'm asking." She set the ledger aside. "Is there anything about your operation, your finances, your land arrangements, anything at all, that Prestondale could find a real hold on, not manufactured?" "Real." Nathaniel was quiet. Not evasively quiet. She knew the difference by now, but the quiet of a man who was actually searching his memory for anything that could qualify. "There is one thing," he said. Clara held very still. "When I first came to this valley," he said, "I bought a section of land from a man named Gerald Marsh. Old claim, old deed, transferred clean. But Gerald Marsh had a son who disputed the sale at the time, said his father had promised it to him verbally. The dispute was settled. The paperwork is solid. But the son he moved to Wyoming has always believed I took something that belonged to him." "His name," Clara said, "Thomas Marsh. And does he know Prestondale?" Nathaniel's eyes changed. Just slightly, the way eyes change when a connection closes that had been open. "I don't know," he said. "I have no reason to think so." "But you didn't rule it out." "No," he said. "I didn't rule it out." Clara stood up. "Then I need you to find out," she said. "Before they do. Because if Prestondale has found Thomas Marsh, then what's coming isn't a letter. It's something with more teeth." She was right. She was right by 4 days. The news came through a source she had not expected, Reverend Harmon, who was not a gossiping man, but was a man who believed in giving people information that affected their well-being when he had it. He came to see her father on a Tuesday morning, and Clara was in the house, and she heard enough to understand what was happening before her father had finished processing it himself. Thomas Marsh had arrived in Willow Creek. He had arrived quietly, the way men arrived, when they had not come to visit but had come to stay. at least long enough to accomplish something. He was staying at the boarding house on the east side of town, and he had been seen, on the evening of his arrival, having supper with Preston Dale. Clara stood in the hallway outside her father's study and felt something settle into her chest that was neither fear nor panic, but the cold, clear cousin of both, the sensation of a situation becoming more serious than the comfortable version you had been hoping for, and the recognition that you had been right not to let yourself believe the comfortable version. She went to Nathaniel within the hour. He was already aware. He had his own sources in this town, built over 12 years, and they had told him what hers had told her, though not quite as quickly. "Tell me everything about the Marsh transaction," she said. "Every document, every conversation you remember. I need the complete picture." "I've already pulled the records," he said. "I know. I need you to tell me the story behind the records." She looked at him. "Documents tell you what happened. Conversation tells you why. I need both." He told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her most significant skills, the ability to receive information completely before she began organizing it, rather than organizing as she went and missing the things that didn't fit the structure she was already building. She listened to the entire account of Gerald Marsh, and the land and Thomas, and the original dispute and the settlement, and she held it all at once and turned it over in her mind, until she found the angle she was looking for. The settlement, she said. Who witnessed it? Judge Warren. And 2 county commissioners, both still sitting. Then the legal ground is solid, yes. But Thomas Marsh isn't here about the legal ground, she said. He's here about something else. He's here because Preston Dale told him something that made it worth his time to come. She thought for a moment. What did you give Gerald Marsh in exchange for the land? Beyond the money. Nathaniel frowned. What do you mean? I mean that in my experience, disputes that look like property disputes are usually about something else underneath. What was the relationship like? What did the Marsh family believe they were getting beyond the sale price? Nathaniel was quiet. Thinking Gerald Marsh was an old man, he said slowly. His wife had died the year before. I think he wanted someone to talk to, more than anything else. I spent a lot of time with him that first year, more than was strictly necessary for business. He was a good man, and Thomas had left years before. He didn't visit. Gerald talked about Thomas leaving, a pause. I think Thomas believes I took his father's company, along with his land. That I displaced him. Clara absorbed that. Let it sit for a moment. Then it's not about the land, she said. Not really. It never was. No, Nathaniel said. I don't think it ever was. Then Preston Dale doesn't have a legal weapon. He has an emotional one. She met Nathaniel's eyes. Which means the answer isn't more documentation. Nathaniel looked at her steadily. What's the answer? You need to talk to Thomas Marsh, she said. Not through lawyers. Not through the county records. Directly. She paused. And I think you need to do it soon. Before Preston Dale has any more time to shape what Thomas believes about you. She could see him thinking about it, working through the discomfort of a conversation he had not sought and had hoped he might not need to have. He won't want to hear me, Nathaniel said. Probably not, Clara agreed. But showing up is different from convincing. Showing up says something that all the documentation in the world can't say. She held his gaze. Your father, did he ever tell you that some things you do not for the outcome but for the record? Nathaniel went still. My mother said that, he said quietly. Mine too, she said. Go talk to Thomas Marsh. He went the following morning. Clara did not go with him. She had known, without needing to discuss it, that this was a conversation Nathaniel needed to have alone, that her presence would change the shape of it in ways that would not serve what needed to happen there. So she waited. She managed her waiting by doing the things she always did when her mind needed to move at full speed, while her body held still. She went through the accounts. She wrote 3 letters that needed writing. She helped her mother with a preserving question and listened to Amelia practice a piece on the piano that she had been working on for a month. Amelia had changed in the weeks since their midnight kitchen conversation. Not dramatically. Amelia had never been the kind of person who changed dramatically, because dramatic change required a comfort with visible vulnerability that she had not, until recently, possessed. But she was different in small ways that Clara was learning to read. She asked questions she would not have asked before. She listened to the answers with more patience. She had begun, tentatively, to talk about what she actually wanted from her own life, rather than what she had been told to want. And the conversations that came out of those tentative beginnings were the most honest conversations the two of them had ever had. That morning, while Clara was writing her second letter, Amelia came and sat beside her. "He went to see the Marshman," Amelia asked. "Yes." "Are you worried?" Clara considered the honest answer. "I'm alert," she said. "There's a difference, Clara." Amelia hesitated. "Can I ask you something? You can always ask. Do you love him?" The question landed quietly in the middle of Clara's morning and sat there, demanding genuine consideration. She set down her pen. She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved, which was what she always did with serious questions, regardless of whether the seriousness was convenient. "I think," she said slowly, "that I am in the process of loving him. I think it started before I recognized it, the way some things start. And I think it's real because it didn't come from any of the reasons I expected love to come from." She paused. "I didn't love him because he chose me. I think I started loving him because of how he listens. Because of the way he's never once tried to be something other than what he is." She looked at her sister. "Why? Because I can see it when you talk about him," Amelia said. "And I wanted you to know that it shows, in a way that is," she searched for the word, "completely unlike anything I've ever seen on your face before." Clara did not answer that, but she did not have to. Nathaniel returned at mid-afternoon. He came directly to the Whitmore ranch. He found Clara on the porch and sat down beside her without ceremony, and she gave him a moment before she asked anything, because she could see from the particular quality of his stillness that the chicken conversation had been significant, and that he needed to let it settle before he could put it into words. "He was there," Nathaniel said finally, "in the boarding house. Preston Dale had set it up. He'd arranged for me not to be able to see Thomas for at least 2 more days through some business at the land office. But I went around it. What did Thomas say? At first he didn't want to talk. He was angry, had been angry for a long time, the kind of anger that runs on its own fuel after a while. He told me I took his father's land and his father's time, and that Gerald had died, feeling like a stranger to his own son because of me." Clara felt the weight of that, did not minimize it. "And what did you say?" "I told him I was sorry. Not that I had done anything wrong, because I didn't, and lying about it would have insulted us both. But that I was sorry he had lost years with his father that he couldn't get back. That Gerald had talked about him. That Gerald had been proud of him even when he was hurt by his absence." Nathaniel paused. "I told him what his father said about him in the last year of his life. Things I'd had no reason to pass on before, because there was no one to pass them to." "How did he respond?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "He cried," he said. "He sat there in that boarding house room, and he cried the way a man cries when he's been holding something for too long and something finally breaks the seal." Another pause. "And then he told me that Preston Dale had promised him he could get the land back. That there was a legal angle that would invalidate the original sale." "Is there?" "No. Thomas knew it too by the end of our conversation. He's not a stupid man. He came here hoping, not believing." Nathaniel turned and looked at Clara directly. "He's leaving tomorrow. He told me he won't cooperate with whatever Preston Dale is building." Clara exhaled, slowly. "What did you give him?" she asked. Nathaniel blinked. "What? To make him decide that quickly," she said. "A man doesn't let go of years of anger in one afternoon, without something shifting the weight." "What did you give him?" Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. "Then I gave him his father's pocket watch. I'd had it since Gerald died. He left it to me specifically, which I'd always found strange. I kept it because it felt wrong to sell it and wrong to throw it away." He paused. "I gave it to Thomas." Clara sat with that for a long moment. "It was exactly the right thing." She was certain of that, with the same bone-deep certainty she brought to all her best assessments. It was not a gesture calculated to resolve a situation. It was a gesture made because it was true, because Gerald Marsh's watch belonged with Gerald Marsh's son, and Nathaniel had known it long before this particular crisis had made it useful. That was the difference. That was the thing that Preston Dale, with all his strategy and manufactured leverage, could never understand or replicate. He could build weapons out of other people's pain. He could not build the kind of trust that made Thomas Marsh look at Nathaniel Carter and choose to believe him. "You did the right thing," she said. "I don't know that it ends, Dale," Nathaniel said. "It doesn't," she said, "but it removes his best piece." She looked at him steadily. "He'll try something else, I know. We'll be ready." He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued, and was still, in small ways, learning to read the one that carried more than could be said in a single word. "We," he said. "Yes," she said, simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Which she had decided some time in the past week it was. The something else came 5 days before the wedding. It came in a form Clara had not predicted, which she acknowledged to herself was her own failure of imagination. She had been thinking about legal angles, financial angles, reputational angles. She had not been thinking about the most direct attack available, which was also the simplest. It came through her father. Preston Dale went to William Whitmore with documents. Not manufactured ones. That was the thing that made Clara's stomach drop when she heard about it, because manufactured documents could be dismantled, and the absence of what they claimed to prove could be demonstrated. What Preston Dale brought was real. What he brought was a contract old, signed, legitimate between Nathaniel Carter and a land development company in Denver that had, in the course of its business 3 years ago, used practices that the territorial government had subsequently determined were improper. Nathaniel had not been part of those practices. He had sold a small parcel of land to the company at the very beginning of his time in the valley, before he had known what they were, and had had no further dealings with them. The subsequent investigation had cleared him entirely. But his name was on a contract. His name was in the same pile of documents as a company that had been publicly condemned. And Preston Dale had found a way to present this information to William Whitmore in a room and a context that made it look like considerably more than it was. Clara's father came to her that evening, with the documents in his hand, and an expression on his face that she recognized as the expression of a man who had been shaken and who was trying not to show it, and was not quite succeeding. "Clara," he said, "I need you to look at this." She looked at it. Every page, every date, every signature. She did not rush, and she did not react, because reacting before she had read everything was the most reliable way to miss the thing that mattered most. She set the last page down. "Papa," she said, "this investigation concluded 2 years ago." Nathaniel was cleared. His name appears in these documents because he sold a parcel of land once, at the beginning, to a company that later did things he had no knowledge of and no involvement in. She looked at her father steadily. "This is not evidence of wrongdoing. This is evidence that Preston Dale has been digging for a very long time, and this is the best he found." Her father looked at the documents, then at her. "Are you certain?" "Go to the county seat and look at the investigation records yourself," she said. "They are public documents. Nathaniel's clearance is on the first page." She paused. "Or trust me, either will get you to the same place." He was quiet for a long time. "Clara," he said finally, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "I always answer honestly. Do you trust him?" The question sat between them in the quiet of the room. Clara did not rush her answer. She thought about the account ledger. She thought about Thomas Marsh and the pocket watch. She thought about the letter from Helen and the quality of his appraisal when she asked of his silence when she asked him difficult questions, and the particular way he had said her name in front of a room full of people who had never bothered to say it first. "Yes," she said, "completely." Her father nodded, slowly. "With the particular weight of a man who has been holding something and is making the decisions to set it down." "Then I'll go to the county seat tomorrow," he said. Not because I doubt you, but because a man owes it to his daughter to be certain when certainty is available." "That's fair," Clara said. He went. He came back with the investigation records. He read the clearance on the first page. And he sat with the documents for a long time, and Clara left him to it, because some processes needed to run without an audience. By the time he came to find her that evening, he had made his decision. "I'm going to see Preston Dale," he said. Clara looked up sharply. "Not to confront him," her father said. "To tell him that I've seen the records, and that whatever he believes he's accomplished, he has not accomplished it in this house." He straightened his back with the particular dignity of a man who has recovered something he had temporarily misplaced. "And to tell him that if he continues attempting to damage my daughter's future, I will make certain that every man in this county knows exactly who he is and why he does what he does." Clara looked at her father, at the set of his jaw and the steadiness of his eyes and the particular quality of his resolve, the same quality she had seen in him when she was a girl, and he had been the man who fixed things before the years had bent him in directions she had been quietly compensating for, without either of them fully acknowledging it. "Papa," she said. "I know," he said. "I should have been paying attention sooner." She stood up and walked across the room and did something she had not done. In many years she put her arms around her father, briefly and firmly, in the manner of a woman who had more to say than words were adequate to, and was choosing the most honest available form of expression. He held on for a moment longer than she expected, and when they stepped back, both of them were, she thought, slightly different people than they had been when they began. Preston Dale, when her father came to him the following morning, tried 2 more angles in the space of a single conversation, one suggesting that the investigation records had been improperly sealed, and one suggesting that the clearance itself had been influenced by Carter money. William Whitmore listened to both without interruption, and then told him, in language that was quiet and final and required no repetition, that he was done with the matter and so was his family. Preston Dale left the conversation without having achieved a single thing he came for. He did not come back. Clara heard about it from her father that evening and felt the particular clean satisfaction watching something built to cause damage fail to connect with anything worth damaging. Not triumph, she did not feel triumph, because triumph implied she had been in doubt about the outcome, and she had not been in doubt. She had been alert. There was still the difference. What she felt instead was something quieter and more durable. The feeling of having stood in the path of a thing that was meant to knock her down and discovered, with complete certainty, that her footing was solid. 4 days before the wedding, Nathaniel came to the Whitmore ranch not for a practical reason and not for a formal visit, but simply because he had come. He found her in the kitchen. She was still always in the kitchen. Some things did not change, and he leaned in the doorway the way he had learned to lean there without making it an intrusion, which was one of the small things she had added to the catalog of things she appreciated about him. "It's over," he said. "Dale isn't going to try again." "I know," she said. "You knew before I told you. I know how men like that work," she said. "When the ground falls away under all 3 angles at once, they don't find a 4th. They relocate the grievance." She glanced at him. "He'll find someone else to be a problem for. It won't be us." He was quiet for a moment. "Then are you ready?" She looked at him. At the directness of the question and the quality of attention behind it, asking not about the wedding, not about the arrangements, but about her. Whether she was ready for the life on the other side of 4 days. "Yes," she said. "You're not even a little frightened." She considered that honestly. "I'm clear," she said. "There's a difference between being unafraid and being clear." "I'm clear." She looked at him steadily. "Are you?" "Yes," he said, and it came out with the same simple, uncomplicated weight that all his most truthful statements carried, not performed, not dressed up, just exactly as much as it needed to be. They stood in the kitchen of the Whitmore ranch, 4 days before the rest of their lives began, and neither of them reached for words than that because neither of them needed more. The clarity between them was already complete. The morning of the wedding, Clara woke before sunrise. She lay still for a few minutes in the dark of her childhood room. The last morning she would wake in this room as Clara Whitmore, daughter of William, useful one, forgotten one, and she took a careful inventory of herself the way she always did before significant undertakings. She was looking for fear. She found instead a quality of readiness that felt like the moment before a door opens, when you know what you've prepared for and you trust the preparation. She got up. She dressed herself without her mother's help, which caused a small, entirely predictable conflict. When her mother appeared in the doorway 40 minutes later and found Clara already assembled and drinking coffee at the kitchen table. "You were supposed to wait for me," her mother said. "I've been dressing myself for 28 years, Clara said. "This is different. I know it's different." Clara looked at her mother. "But I am still the same person getting dressed. I didn't need help with that part." Her mother stood in the doorway for a moment, with the expression of a woman recalibrating in real time. Then she crossed the room and sat down across from Clara, and did something that surprised them both. She reached across the table and put her hand over Clara's, and she held it there without speaking. Clara looked at the hand. Her mother's hands were like hers, strong, practical, marked by years of work that had never been acknowledged as work because it happened inside a house rather than outside of one. She had never noticed how much alike their hands were until that moment. "I know I made mistakes," her mother said quietly, without preamble, which was unusual for a woman who had always preferred to approach difficult things obliquely. "With you, with what I paid attention to and what I didn't. Mom, let me say it." She tightened her hand slightly. "I saw Amelia's beauty, and I thought that was the thing to build around. And you were so capable, so self-sufficient, that I let myself believe you didn't need what Amelia needed. That you were fine." She paused. "I told myself you were fine when what I should have done was ask." Clara sat with that. She thought about 28 years of being fine. About how fine was the word people used when they meant "I am managing without assistance," which was never the same as "I am flourishing." "I was fine," Clara said. "That part was true. But fine and happy are not the same thing, and I think we both know I was more of one than the other." Her mother's eyes did something complicated. "Yes," she said. "I know that now. I know you know." Clara turned her hand over and held her mother's properly, palm to palm, the way people held hands when they meant it. "We can't go back and do it differently. But we're here now. And I'm marrying a man this morning who saw me when most people were looking the other way, and I'm going to build something real with him. That's what matters now." Her mother nodded. She pressed her lips together briefly in the manner of a woman, keeping her composure by the narrowest of margins. "He's a good man," she said. "He is," Clara agreed. "And I intend to be a good partner to him, which is what I should have always been allowed to be for someone." They sat together a moment longer. Then her mother stood, straightened herself, and became the woman who managed household occasions with brisk efficiency, the version of herself that Clara had seen most often and understood most completely. "Then let's make sure you look like exactly what you are," her mother said. "The woman who is going to walk into that church and make every person who underestimated you understand what they missed." Clara smiled. It was a genuine smile, not the small, contained kind she usually managed, but the fuller, surprised kind that arrived when something landed better than expected. "Now that," she said, "I'll accept your help with." Amelia appeared 20 minutes later and contributed to the process with an enthusiasm that would have been irritating under different circumstances, but was somehow exactly right that morning. She had a talent for the kind of details that Clara genuinely did not care about, and therefore did not notice the precise placement of the pin in Clara's hair, the way a particular fold in the fabric changed the line of everything. She worked with a focused, undemonstrative care that Clara recognized, because it was the same care she herself applied to things that mattered. "You look like yourself," Amelia said, when she stepped back to assess. "Only more so. Is that good?" Clara asked. "It's the best thing I could say." Amelia looked at her steadily. "You look like someone who knows exactly who she is, which is more than most brides ever manage." Clara looked at her sister. at the uncomplicated sincerity in her face, the Amelia who was emerging from underneath the Amelia that the town had built, and who was considerably more interesting and considerably more honest than the original construction. "Amelia," she said, "what do you want? For yourself? Not for the family, not for how it looks, for you." Amelia blinked. "Why are you asking me this now?" "Because I'm not going to be down the hall anymore," Clara said. "And because the question matters. And I should have asked it more often. And I'm asking it now while I still have the time." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "Then I want to teach. I want to work with children." She said it with the particular tentativeness of someone saying a truth thing for the first time and waiting to see whether it sounds as real out loud as it did inside. "There's talk of a proper school in the next town. I've been thinking about whether I might be someone they'd consider." "You would be excellent," Clara said, immediately. Without hedging, Amelia's face changed. Something lightened in it. "You think so? You are patient, you are intelligent, and you know how to pay attention to people," Clara said. "Those are the three things that make a teacher. Everything else is learned." She held her sister's gaze. "Apply this week. Don't wait for someone to give you permission." Amelia looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something Clara had not seen her do since they were girls. Together she grabbed Clara's hands and held them tight, briefly and with complete sincerity, before letting go and composing herself in the way women composed themselves when they were moved and did not want to show the full extent of it. "Go get married," Amelia said. "I'll sort out the rest." Clara believed her. The church was full. This was the fact that registered first when Clara walked through the door on her father's arm, not the decorations, not the assembled faces, but the sheer quantity of Willow Creek that had decided the wedding of Nathaniel Carter and Clara Whitmore was worth attending. People who had whispered in dry goods stores and spoken loudly in social spaces about the inexplicability of Nathaniel's choice were now seated in the same pews where they sat every Sunday, watching with the particular quality of attention that comes from people who want to see how a story they've been following ends. Clara was aware of all of it. She was not made uncomfortable by it. She had spent 28 years developing the skill of being present in a room without being destabilized by what the room thought of her, and that skill did not desert her now. What was different, what she had not quite anticipated, was the quality of her own feeling as she moved down that aisle. Because she had expected to feel determined. She had expected to feel purposeful. She had expected the particular focused clarity she brought to every significant undertaking. What she had not expected was to feel seen, not by the room. The room had always been there. She did not need the room's vision to feel complete. She felt seen because Nathaniel was standing at the front of that church, looking at her with the same quality of attention he had given her in the kitchen. That very first afternoon, the look that said, "I know what I'm looking at, and I know why it matters," and it was directed at her, completely and without reservation, in front of every person in Willow Creek who had ever failed to look twice. She reached the front. Her father put her hand in Nathaniel's. She felt the steadiness of his grip, not possessive, not nervous. Certain. The grip of a man who had decided something and was at peace with his decision. "You look exactly like yourself," he said very quietly. Not as a compliment in the performed sense, as an observation. As something he was glad about. "Someone told me this morning that was the best thing to look like," she said. He almost smiled. "Smart woman," he said, "whoever that was." Then Reverend Harmon began, and Clara Whitmore stood in front of the entirety of Willow Creek and listened to the words that were going to change the legal and social architecture of her life. And she did not feel afraid or overwhelmed, or like a woman who had been rescued from one situation by another. She felt like exactly what she was, a woman who had made a deliberate, clear-eyed decision and who was standing in the full weight of it, with her spine straight and her hands steady. The ceremony went as ceremonies go, and then came the moment. Reverend Harmon finished the final words. The church held the particular breathless quality of a room waiting for something. Nathaniel turned to Clara. He reached up and touched her face with one hand, not a dramatic gesture, Nothing that announced itself, just the simple, complete gesture of a man reaching for the person he loved, in front of everyone, without apology or performance. And then he kissed her. It was not brief. It was not the modest, socially calibrated contact that wedding kisses in Willow Creek usually were. It was full and certain, and it said, clearly, and without a single word, everything that Nathaniel Carter had said with words since the afternoon in the parlor when he had looked past the entire room and found the one person in it he was looking for. The church went completely silent, not the silence of discomfort. The silence of a room full of people who have just understood something they thought they already understood and have discovered they had it wrong. When they separated, Clara could feel the quality of the silence around her, and she understood what was in it. The same people who had said he'll regret it within a year were sitting in those pews processing the visual evidence that Nathaniel Carter was not a man who had made a confused or mistaken choice. He was a man who had made the most deliberate choice of his life, and who was not the slightest bit uncertain about it, and who intended for everyone present to know that beyond any possible ambiguity. Margaret Fowler, in the third row, had her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Mrs. Calloway, who had found pressing business elsewhere whenever Clara arrived at the dry goods store, was sitting very straight and very still, with the expression of a woman revising a judgment she had held confidently and is now discovering was insufficient. And in the back of the church, Clara caught a glimpse of the Henderson daughters, both of them, sitting side by side, watching with expressions that had moved entirely past calculation into something that might have been, genuinely, admiration. Clara turned back to the front of the church and breathed in once, slowly, with the feeling of a woman who has just watched a door close on a version of her life that was never adequate and open into something considerably larger. They signed the register. They walked back down the aisle together. And when they emerged into the November air outside the church, Clara felt Nathaniel's hand find hers, and hold it with the same unhurried certainty he brought to everything, and she held back with the same, and they walked into the rest of their lives, with exactly that much between them, and exactly enough. The first year of marriage taught Clara things that the engagement, for all its richness, had not. She had expected to be busy. She had spent 28 years being busy, and she was constitutionally equipped for it. The ranch required the same qualities that the Whitmore household had always required, only at a considerably larger scale. And Clara expanded into that scale with the unsurprised capability of someone who had always had more capacity than her previous life had room for. What she had not expected was to be known. It was a different experience from being capable. Being capable, she understood. Being known, having someone in the same house who paid attention to her specifically, who noticed when she was tired before she said so, who asked her opinion on things that mattered, and then actually integrated what she said into decisions, that was new territory, and she moved through it carefully at first, the way she moved through any unfamiliar terrain, testing the ground before she put her full weight on it. The ground held. Every time she tested it, it held. There was a morning in February, 3 months into the marriage, when Nathaniel came in from the early rounds of the ranch and found Clara at the table with the accounts and a cup of cold coffee, and the particular expression she wore when she had found something that wasn't adding up and hadn't found the resolution yet. He did not ask what was wrong. He poured himself coffee, pulled a chair next to hers, and said, "Show me." She showed him. They worked through it together for 2 hours. He was not as fast as she was with the numbers, he knew that, and did not pretend otherwise, but he asked questions that pushed her thinking in directions she had not tried, and twice he caught something she had moved past too quickly. And by the end they had found the problem and solution and built a solution that was better than what either of them would have found alone. He pushed back from the table when they were done and looked at her. "Do you know what that felt like?" he said. "Accounting," she said. "Partnership," he said. "That is what partnership feels like." She looked at him, at the plain directness of it, no flourish, no performance. Just the word, said because it was true. "Yes," she said. "It is." What she had not anticipated, And what arrived with the sudden force of something that had been building quietly for months was the crisis that hit the ranch in March. It began with the weather, because in Montana the weather was always the variable that everything else depended on, and that nobody could fully prepare for. A late-season storm, harder and longer than any forecast had predicted, hit the northern range and drove half the Carter herd into a section of fence that had been marked for reinforcement in the spring schedule but had not yet been touched. The fence failed. Cattle scattered across 3 properties. 2 ranch hands were caught in the storm trying to recover them, and one came back with his hands badly frostbitten. And the other did not come back until morning, found by the alderman boy near the tree line, cold through but breathing. The ranch hands who remained were managing the immediate aftermath when Clara came out of the house and assessed the situation. In the first 30 seconds, Nathaniel was gone. He had ridden out before the worst of the storm to try to head off the herd at the east line and had not come back. And the hand she sent to find him returned with the information that the east road was impassable and that Carter's horse had come back without him. That was the moment Clara understood what it meant to have something to lose. She did not collapse into it. She did not have that kind of time. She made 3 decisions in the space of a minute, organized the remaining hands, sent 2 of them on a different route toward the east line, and went herself on the 3rd route because she knew this land better than anyone who had worked it for less than a decade, and she trusted her own knowledge over her own fear. She found him 40 minutes later. His horse had thrown him when the animal spooked at something in the whiteout conditions, and he had a broken rib from the fall and had been moving slowly back toward the ranch on foot. When she came up on him through the storm, he looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, the expression of a man who is very glad to see someone and is genuinely, completely surprised by how glad he is. "Clara," he said. "Get on the horse," she said. "I'm—" "Nathaniel, get on the horse." He got on the horse. She rode beside him back to the ranch, close enough that if he lost his balance she could reach him, and she talked to him the entire way, not about anything significant, just words. A running account of what had happened, and what had been done, and what still needed doing, because she understood that his attention needed something to hold on to, and she could give him that. They got back. She got him inside. She looked at his rib and determined it was cracked rather than broken badly, which was bad enough but manageable. And she wrapped it with the competence of a woman who had dealt with ranch injuries her entire life, and who was not going to stop managing simply because the injured party was now her husband, and the fear of losing him was sitting in her chest like a stone. The ranch hands had recovered most of the herd by evening. The 2 men she had sent by the alternate route had found the main grouping and turned them. The losses were real but not catastrophic. Everything that could be done had been done, and it had been done because someone had kept their head when the situation demanded it. Nathaniel lay in bed that night with his wrapped rib and his pride slightly dented. He was the kind of man who found being saved by anyone, even someone he loved, a thing that required processing, and Clara sat in the chair beside the bed and said nothing until he was ready to speak. "I should have trusted the forecast more," he said finally. "The forecast was wrong," she said. "You couldn't have known. I should have reinforced that fence in the fall. You had it on the spring list because the fall assessment said it had another season in it." She looked at him steadily. "You made reasonable decisions with the information you had. The storm was unreasonable." He was quiet for a moment. "You went out in that," he said. "To find me, of course I did." "You didn't have to, Nathaniel." She said his name with the patient, direct weight she gave to things she needed him to actually hear. "I went out because you were out there, and because I know this land, and because there was no one else who could do it as well. Those are the reasons." She paused. "I didn't go out because I was afraid to lose you. I went out because that is what you do when your partner is in the field and needs another set of eyes." He looked at her. The expression was the one she had catalogued, except larger than usual, more exposed, somehow, as if the storm and the fall and the cold had worn away whatever thin layer of reserve he usually kept between himself and the full weight of what he felt. "Clara," he said. "Yes, I love you," he said it plainly. No architecture around it, just the words, direct and unambiguous, the way he said everything true. "I have loved you for longer than I've known how to say it well." She sat with that for a moment. She had known it was there. She had watched it build in the way she watched all real things build, not in grand declarations, but in the accumulation of small, genuine moments. She had known it without being told, because she was Clara, and she paid attention. But hearing it said aloud, in a cracked voice, in the aftermath of a storm that had nearly taken him, with no performance, and no strategy, and no audience except herself, that was something her preparation had not fully accounted for. She felt it move through her like warm water. "I know," she said. And then, because honesty was the governing principle of everything between them, "I love you too." I think I started before I let myself believe it was possible. He reached for her hand. She gave it. They stayed like that for a long time while the storm finished its business outside and the ranch settled back into its own rhythms. And Clara understood, sitting in that chair with her hand in his, that what she had built here was not the thing she had spent 28 years being told was not for her. It was better than that. The storm reshaped Clara's place in the ranch in ways she had not planned and did not entirely anticipate. Nathaniel's rib kept him moving carefully for 6 weeks, which meant the range of things that required attention: the accounting, the supplier negotiations, the ongoing fence repairs. The decisions about the spring cattle schedule fell to Clara in a more complete way than they had before. Not because she took over, because she was there and capable, and it was simply the most efficient way for things to work. The ranch hands adjusted faster than she expected. She had anticipated more resistance. She was new. She was a woman. She had arrived as the boss's wife, rather than as someone they had chosen to follow. What she found instead was that competence, communicated clearly and applied consistently, rendered most of those objections moot within 2 weeks. A man who watches someone make the right call twice, 3 times, in situations where the right call is not obvious, generally stops caring about the circumstances that brought them there. By the end of April, she was running the operational side of the ranch with the same matter-of-fact authority she had brought to the Whitmore household for 28 years, and nobody was asking permission about it anymore. The first person from town to acknowledge it directly was Henry Alderman. He came to the ranch on a practical matter, something about a shared fence line and the spring repairs, and Nathaniel sent him to Clara because she had the relevant records and the better grasp of the repair schedule. Henry Alderman sat across from Clara at the kitchen table and received the information he needed and worked through the practical decisions with her, and then, at the end of it, looked at her with the plain, unhurried directness of an old man who had been around long enough to have no patience for things that were not true. "You know," he said, "when Nathaniel chose you, most people in this town thought he'd made a fool of himself." "I know," Clara said. "I wasn't one of them," he said. "I'd seen how you were with my wife when the children were sick. I knew what kind of person you were. Thank you, Henry." "I'm not done." He looked at her steadily. "What I didn't know, what I don't think even Nathaniel knew entirely, was how good you are at this." He gestured at the papers between them, at the ranch, outside the window, at the whole apparatus of what she was managing. "I've been working my land for 40 years, and I know what runs a property well and what doesn't. You have a gift for it." Clara looked at the papers on the table. "It's not a gift," she said. "It's practice. I've been managing a household's finances and logistics since I was 17. This is the same work at a larger scale." "Then it was a waste," Henry said. "All those years, managing something too small for you." He shook his head. "The world does that to women, takes the most capable ones and puts them in rooms too small for what they could do." Clara was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't wasted," she said finally. "Every year of it made me exactly who I am right now, sitting here. I wouldn't know how to do this if I hadn't done all of that." She looked at him. "I'd rather think of it as preparation than waste." Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, with the decisiveness of a man who has just heard something he is going to be thinking about for a considerable time. "You're good for him," he said. "And this valley." He left. Clara sat with the papers for a moment longer, and then she gathered them and put them away and went back to the work of the day, because that was what she always did. But she sat with Henry's words. She sat with them for longer than she expected, turning them over in the particular quiet part of her mind where she kept things she was still deciding what to do with. The world does that to women. She could have been angry about it, the years in the small room, the overlooked capabilities, the decades of being the useful one rather than the valued one. She had been angry, at various points, in the thin, quiet way that anger expressed itself in a woman who had learned early that expressing it loudly only made the rooms smaller. But what she had found, in the months since the wedding and the storm, and the accumulation of small daily proofs that her footing was solid, was that the anger was losing its hold. Not because the injustice had not been real, it had been completely real, but because she had been given something she had not expected, which was the experience of what it felt like when the room was finally the right size. And it turned out that experience was more useful than the anger had ever been. She thought about Amelia. She had written to her sister twice since the wedding, and received 2 letters back, the second of which contained the news that Amelia had applied to the teaching position in the next town, and had been invited for an interview. Letter was written, with a new quality of life in it, a brightness that was different from Amelia's brightness, which had always been slightly performed. This was something more honest and more durable. Clara wrote back that evening, "Go to the interview. Wear the blue dress, not the green. Answer their questions directly, without softening anything. You know more than you think you know. Start from that." She sealed it and set it with the outgoing mail, and went to find Nathaniel, who was moving more easily, now that the rib was healing, sitting on the porch in the last of the evening light. She sat beside him, not because she needed to say anything, because this was where she wanted to be. He looked at her after a moment. "Good day?" he asked. "Henry Alderman came by," she said. "The fence question. I know, I sent him to you." "He said something worth keeping," she said. Nathaniel waited. He had learned to wait when she was deciding how to put something, to give the words room to arrive. He said, "The world puts the most capable women in rooms too small for them," she said. "And I've been thinking about whether that's a reason to be angry or a reason to be deliberate about making sure it doesn't happen to the next ones." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "What would deliberately making sure look like?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm thinking about it." She looked at him. "Does that concern you?" He looked back at her with the expression she had catalogued and revised, and was still occasionally surprised by the one that contained more than any single word was adequate to hold. "Clara," he said, "the day I am concerned about you deciding to do more good in the world is the day I have forgotten everything I knew about why I chose you." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she leaned back slightly, into the particular ease that had become the texture of the life they had built, and she looked out at the Carter, range in the last of the light, and she felt it all at once, the fullness of it, the realness of it, the extraordinary ordinary fact of a life that was finally, completely, the right size. She had been the forgotten sister for 28 years. She was not forgotten now. She had not been found, either not in the way that stories sometimes told it, as if a woman's worth waited passively to be discovered by the right man's attention. She had always been there. She had always been this. It had taken a man with the clarity to look in the right direction, and a crisis that required everything she had, and a town's worth of doubt she had dismantled one piece at a time, and a sister's slowly opening honesty, and a father's belated acknowledgement, and 12 months of a marriage that had exceeded every reasonable expectation she had allowed herself to hold. But she had always been exactly this. And now, sitting in the last light of an April evening beside the man who had known it before she had fully believed it herself, she allowed herself to feel that completely. Without qualification, without the habit of diminishment she had spent 28 years practicing. Just completely. The letter from Amelia arrived on a Thursday morning in late May, and Clara read it twice at the kitchen table before she let herself believe what it said. She got the position, not the junior teaching assistant role that the school board had originally advertised, which would have been enough, which would have been more than Amelia had ever been given permission to reach for in Willow Creek. The full teaching post, 3 grades, 12 students, starting in September. The letter Amelia had written to Clara was 3 pages long and covered every detail of the interview with the breathless, unguarded joy of a woman who had just discovered that the person she actually was turned out to be exactly the person the world needed her to be. Clara set the letter down. She sat with it for a moment. Then she stood up and walked to the door and called for Nathaniel, who was in the near pasture talking with one of the hands about the summer grazing rotation. He came in. She handed him the letter without explaining what it was. She watched him read it, and she watched the expression on his face move through recognition and then into something warm and quietly pleased. She did it, he said. She did it entirely on her own, Clara said. I only told her which dress to wear. You told her to start from what she knew, he said. He handed the letter back. That is not a small thing to tell someone. Clara thought about that. About the night she had sat in the kitchen across from Amelia and told her to ask for what she actually wanted, rather than what she had been groomed to expect. About the way something had shifted in her sister's face, not dramatically, but permanently, like a bone resetting after years of being slightly wrong. I'm going to write to her today, Clara said. Tell her we'll come for the opening of the school term, Nathaniel said. Both of us. She looked at him. She should have someone there, he said simply. Someone who chose to be there because they wanted to be. Clara wrote the letter. And then she went back to work, because there was always work, and because the work had become one of the things she loved about this life, rather than simply one of the things it required. The summer moved the way Montana summers moved, fast and full, and physically demanding, in ways that left no room for the kind of idle reflection that Clara had never had much patience for anyway. The Carter Ranch ran at the highest efficiency it had seen in years, which was not a coincidence, and the people who understood ranching in the valley began to notice. Not loudly, not in the ways that got written about, but in the quiet, reliable way that competence always eventually asserts itself in communities small enough to pay attention. The grain supplier in Billings settled the overcharging dispute in June. He did not do it graciously. He did it the way men who have been caught doing something they knew was wrong do it, with a defensive explanation that answered questions nobody had asked, but he settled. And the adjustment went back 18 months, the way Clara had said it would. And the number that came back to the Carter accounts was not insignificant. Nathaniel brought the settlement confirmation to Clara at the kitchen table and set it in front of her. You were right about every part of it, he said. I usually am about numbers, she said. She looked at the figure, put half of it into the spring fence reinforcement, and hold the rest against the fall cattle expenses. He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued so many times, and which still, in its best moment, had the power to stop her briefly in the middle of whatever she was doing. Clara, he said, what, do you know what you've done to this ranch in 8 months? She considered the question honestly. I've corrected accounting errors, recovered overbilled amounts, reorganized the operational schedule, renegotiated 2 supplier contracts, and restructured the hay storage system so that we're losing approximately 60% less product to weather damage than we were before. Yes, he said, all of that. He paused, and also the hands don't leave anymore. We haven't lost a single experienced worker since November. Do you know why? She had an idea, but she let him say it. Because they feel like this place is run by people who know what they're doing, he said. Because when there's a problem, it gets solved without chaos. Because when someone asks for something reasonable, they get an answer and not a runaround. He held her gaze. That's you. That is what you brought here. Clara was quiet for a moment. It's both of us, she said. It started with me building something worth bringing it to, he said. But what it is now, that's you too, and I need you to know that I know that. She looked at him across the kitchen table, with the morning light coming through, and the smell of coffee between them, and 12 months of a life she had been told was not for her, arranged around them both. I know that you know, she said. That's one of the things I love most about you. He smiled. Not the small controlled version, the real one. The one she had been collecting since the beginning, that arrived without announcement and disappeared before he seemed to notice it had been there. She filed it away with all the others. It was in July that Willow Creek gave Clara the first piece of public acknowledgement she had never asked for and did not know how to receive gracefully. It came through Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, who was 71 years old and had lived in the valley longer than anyone except old Henry Alderman, and who had the particular authority that comes from a person who has watched enough of life to stop being impressed by things that do not deserve impression, and to be genuinely moved by the things that do. Eleanor Briggs appeared at the Carter Ranch on a Tuesday afternoon and asked to speak to Clara. Not to Nathaniel, to Clara. She stated this clearly enough that the hand who came to the house with the message understood it was not a social call where Clara might optionally be included. Clara came out. Eleanor Briggs was sitting in the front room with the straight spine and level gaze, who had long ago decided she would not shrink herself for any room she entered. Mrs. Carter, she said. Mrs. Briggs, Clara said. Can I get you coffee? No, I'll say what I came to say, and then I'll leave you to your work, because I know you have it. Eleanor looked at her directly. I want to tell you something I should have said sooner. And I want to say it in person, rather than through the channels that information usually travels in this town. Clara sat down. She gave Eleanor her full attention because Eleanor Briggs had earned it. I watched what happened with Preston Dale, Eleanor said. I watched how you handled the land records and the Marsh situation and the letter business. I watched you dismantle every piece of it without making a spectacle of yourself and without asking anyone for help you didn't actually need. She paused. And I want you to know that there are women in this valley who saw all of it, who saw what you did and how you did it, and who have been talking about it, not in the way things usually get talked about here, but in the way that matters. Clara said nothing. She was listening. There are 3 women in this county, Eleanor continued, whose situations are not unlike what yours was a year ago. Not the romantic part, the other part. Women with capability that their circumstances have made invisible. Women who have been managing things that don't belong to them and receiving credit for none of it. She held Clara's gaze. I would like to bring them to you, not for a social call, for a conversation, because I believe you have things to tell them that I cannot, because I do not know from the inside what they need to hear. Clara sat with that for a moment. She thought about what she had said to Nathaniel on the porch in April, about whether anger at a wrong thing could be turned into something deliberate that prevented the wrong thing from happening to the next person. About how she had been turning that question over in the months since and had not yet found a form for it. She thought she might have just been handed one. When, she said. Eleanor Briggs almost smiled. I told Nathaniel's wife would say yes, she said. I told them she wouldn't make me ask twice. You were right both times, Clara said. Bring them Thursday. They came Thursday. 3 women, as Eleanor had said. Clara made coffee and did not make it into more than it was. She sat with them at the kitchen table, the same table where she had worked through the accounts, and the supplier disputes, and the letters that had dismantled Preston Dale's campaign piece by piece. And she talked to them with the same directness and absence of condescension that Nathaniel had always given her hunker. She told them what she knew. Not as inspiration, not as a story with a lesson attached as practical information delivered plainly from someone who had moved through the specific terrain they were standing in and had notes on what the ground looked like. She told them about the account ledgers and the difference between what books showed and what was actually happening. She told them about the importance of understanding any arrangement, any transaction, any agreement completely, before putting a name to it. She told them about the particular skill of walking into a room where you were not expected and conducting yourself as if the room had been waiting for you, because in the situations that mattered, it usually had been. One of the women younger than Clara, a rancher's wife from the north side of the valley, said, at the end, "How did you know that you were worth fighting for?" Clara thought about that carefully. "I didn't always know," she said. "I believed it theoretically. The way you believe things you've been told are true but have not yet proven. What changed it was being seen by someone who didn't have a reason to lie to me about it." She looked at the woman steadily. "But here is what I've learned since then. His seeing me did not create my worth. It helped me see what was already there." She paused. "Your worth does not require someone else's confirmation. It requires your own." The room was quiet after that. Eleanor Briggs, sitting in the corner with her coffee, said nothing. But Clara saw her nod once, barely perceptible, the nod of a woman who had waited 71 years to hear someone say that exact thing in exactly those words. The women left at late afternoon. Clara stood on the porch, afterward, and breathed in the particular quality of a summer evening in the valley, and felt something settle in her that she recognized as the thing she had been looking for, without knowing she was looking. Purpose was the closest word. But it was purpose with roots, the kind that had grown from something real and painful and long endured and transformed, rather than that arrived cleanly and easily, and therefore could be taken cleanly and easily away. Nathaniel found her there after an hour. "How was it?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'll know more when I see what they do with it." He stood beside her. "You're going to do this again," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said, "if Eleanor keeps bringing them to me." "And I think she will." "I think so too." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad." She looked at him. "Are you, Clara?" He said her name with the patient directness he used when he wanted her to hear something clearly. "The day I stood in your father's parlor and said your name in front of that room, I was not making an act of charity. I was not rescuing someone. I was recognizing something that already existed and that I wanted to spend my life beside." He held her gaze. "Watching you do this, watching you turn what you went through into something that helps other people, that is exactly what I recognized. I am not glad because I had anything to do with it. I am glad because I get to watch it." Clara looked at him for a long time. "You are," she said finally, "an unusually good man." "You're an unusually honest woman," he said. "It balances." She took his hand. He held it. They stood there in the summer evening, on the porch of the life they had built, and Clara thought about the woman she had been a year ago, the one who carried a tray through a parlor and believed, somewhere underneath the capability and the competence and the quiet endurance, that the room she occupied was the right size for her. She could not have been more wrong. But she was grateful for the years in the small room. In the way she had told Henry Alderman, she was grateful not with resignation, not with the performed peace of a person who has decided to make the best of something. With the genuine understanding that every year of it had made her exactly who she needed to be for this. The autumn brought the school term, and with it the trip to see Amelia. They arrived at the schoolhouse on the first morning of the term, and Clara stood at the back of the room, while Amelia stood at the front of it, and spoke to 12 children with a clarity and warmth and absolute, unperformed authority that made Clara feel something she had not expected, the particular, sharp emotion of watching someone you love become fully themselves in front of your eyes. Amelia was extraordinary, not the kind of extraordinary she had been in Willow Creek, the kind that was about surface and presentation and being looked at. The kind that came from knowing what you were doing and caring about it completely, and being willing to put all of yourself into a room full of children who needed someone to be both honest and kind. After, when the children had gone and the three of them stood in the empty schoolroom, Amelia looked at Clara with an expression Clara had never seen on her sister's face. Complete. The expression of someone who has found the shape of their life and stepped into it without reservation. "Well," Amelia said. "You were born for this," Clara said. Amelia pressed her lips together briefly. Then she laughed, a real laugh, the kind she had not done easily before. "I spent 30 years being told I was born to be decorative," she said. "And it turns out I was born to teach 12-year-olds about long division." "Those are not mutually exclusive," Nathaniel said from the doorway, with the understated dryness that Clara had learned to watch for, and that still, reliably, surprised her into genuine amusement. They had supper together that evening, the three of them, and they talked the way the Whitmore sisters had never talked when they were growing up, directly, without the architecture of family expectation pressing down on every sentence, without the silent competition that had shaped the air between them for years. They talked about real things, about what Amelia was learning and what Clara was building, and what it meant to be a woman in this valley at this particular moment in time. Amelia asked about the Thursday gatherings. Clara told her. "How many women now?" Amelia asked. "7 regulars," Clara said. "And Eleanor Briggs, who does not consider herself a regular, but has not missed a single Thursday." Amelia smiled. "What do you talk about?" "Accounting mostly," Clara said. "How to read a contract. How to understand what you're agreeing to before you agree to it. How to walk into a room and behave as if you belong there, because you do." She paused. "Practical things. Important things," Amelia said. "Those tend to be the same," Clara said. On the ride home the following day, Nathaniel was quiet for a long stretch of miles, in the way he was sometimes quiet when he was holding something he was deciding whether to say. Clara waited. "I want to tell you something," he said finally. "Then tell me." "When I walked into your father's parlor," he said, "I had made a decision based on everything I had observed over 3 years. I was confident in the decision, but I did not know." He paused. "I did not know how much larger the thing I was walking toward was than what I had seen of it." Clara looked at the road ahead. "What I have watched you become in this past year," he said, "or rather what I have watched you reveal, because it was always there, it exceeds anything I understood I was choosing when I chose you. And I chose you because I thought you were remarkable." Another pause. "I significantly underestimated." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Nathaniel," she said, "yes, you did not underestimate. You simply could not see the whole of something that had not yet been given room to be whole." She looked at him. "That is not a failure of perception. That is what happens when something has been kept too small for too long and is finally given space." He considered that fair, he said. "It is," she said. "And for what it's worth, I underestimated you too." He glanced at her. "I thought you were a good man with clear eyes and honest instincts," she said. "I did not think you were someone who would stand in a schoolroom doorway and make me laugh at the exact right moment." She paused. "I did not think you would be my favorite person." He did not say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "Your favorite?" "Don't make me say it twice," she said. He did not make her say it twice. But she saw, from the side, the expression that crossed his face, the real smile, the one she had been collecting since the beginning, arriving without warning and departing before he caught it. She caught it. She always caught it. She added it to the collection and kept moving. By the time the second winter settled over the Carter range, the Thursday gatherings had grown to 11 women, and Eleanor Briggs had stopped pretending she was only attending to be helpful and had begun contributing to the conversations with the directness and precision of someone who had a great deal to say and had been waiting for the right room to say it in. The grain supplier in Billings had been replaced with a fair contract from a closer source, saving the ranch a measurable amount annually. 2 of the women from the Thursday group had renegotiated their household arrangements. One with her husband's understanding cooperation, one in the face of his initial resistance, and had found, in both cases, that understanding the practical architecture of their own situations gave them ground to stand on that they had not known was there. Amelia wrote every 2 weeks. The letters were getting longer. She had begun corresponding with a teacher in Denver who was working on a curriculum structure for frontier schools, and the correspondence had led to an invitation to contribute to a publication he was developing. Amelia's letter announcing this fact was 4 pages long and contained 3 exclamation points, which was 3 more than Clara had ever seen her use in writing. Clara wrote back, "Say yes, you have been ready for this longer than you know. Start from what you know." She sealed the letter and went to find Nathaniel. He was in the near pasture, not for any operational reason, just standing in the late afternoon quiet, looking at the range they had built together. The land that had been his and had become theirs, and was now something different from either of those things. Something that reflected both of them, equally and without hierarchy. She came and stood beside him. They did not speak for a while. They had become comfortable with that, with become comfortable with silence. Between two people who know each other well enough to be quiet together without either of them feeling unseen. It was Nathaniel who finally spoke. "Do you remember what you said to me?" he said. "The first time I asked you why you wanted time to think, about not making decisions based on one conversation?" "I remember," she said. "You were the most direct person who had ever refused me anything," he said. "I think that was the moment I was certain." Clara looked at him. "Certain of what? That you were exactly who I thought you were." He turned to look at her. Most people, when they want something, perform the version of themselves most likely to get it. You did the opposite. You showed me who you actually were and let me decide from that. He paused. "I have never once regretted what I decided." Clara thought about the woman who had stood in that kitchen doorway with a tray, who had spent 28 years being the capable one, the useful one, the one nobody had bothered to choose. She thought about the long walk from that woman to this one, not a walk that had required a man's validation to begin, but a walk that had been made easier, more possible, more fully itself. Because someone with honest eyes had looked at her and said, "I see you," and meant it. She thought about 12 women, now 11, around a kitchen table on Thursdays, soon more. Because Eleanor Briggs did not do things by halves, and about what it meant to take the thing that had diminished you and convert it into the thing that made you useful to others in a way that mattered. She thought about Amelia teaching long division and writing for a publication and becoming, month by month, the fullest version of herself. She thought about her father, who visited every few weeks and who had become, in his late years, something closer to a father than he had managed to be, when it would have been easiest, not because the past had been undone, but because something in the present had made a different kind of honesty possible. She thought about all of it, the whole shape of it, and she let herself feel it completely, not as gratitude for having been rescued, not as relief at having escaped, but as the simple, exact recognition of a woman standing in a life that fit her. "Nathaniel," she said, "yes, I want to tell you something." "Then tell me." "I spent 28 years believing not loudly, not consciously, but underneath everything that the reason I was overlooked was because there was something about me that deserved to be overlooked." She looked at him steadily. "I no longer believe that, and it matters to me that you know I no longer believe it. Not because you fixed it, but because being known by you was part of how I learned to know myself." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "Clara," he said, "there was never a single day you deserved to be overlooked." "I know that now," she said. "That's the point." He reached over and took her hand. She held it the way she always held his, without performance, without qualification, with the full, unhesitating grip of a woman who had decided what she wanted and had stopped apologizing for wanting it. The valley stretched out before them, in the late afternoon light, the range, the fence lines, the cattle moving in the distance, all of it theirs and real and solid underfoot. The kind of solid that does not shift when you put your full weight on it. The kind that had been tested and had held. In Willow Creek, in the years that followed, people stopped calling Clara Carter the forgotten sister. It happened gradually, without announcement, the way real changes happen in small communities through the accumulation of moments that slowly made the old story obsolete. They began to call her simply Clara Carter. And then they began to say her name. They said the names of people who had shaped a place with a particular combination of familiarity and respect that a community reserves for those who have proven themselves indispensable not through any dramatic gesture, but through the quiet, consistent, extraordinary fact of showing up completely and giving everything and leaving every room slightly better than they found it. Nathaniel Carter had walked into the Whitmore parlor looking for the most remarkable person in it. He had found her by the kitchen door, not because she was hidden and not because he had uncovered her from somewhere she had been buried, because she had always been standing there, in full view, carrying the weight of everything with both hands, and he had been the first person in that room to understand that weight not as something ordinary, but as the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. She had been the forgotten sister. She was not forgotten now. She had never in truth been forgettable. The world had simply not been paying attention, and Clara Whitmore Carter, with her steady hands and her clear eyes and the full, undiminished force of everything she had always been, had simply gone on being remarkable until the world caught up.